The chains bit into Bonnie Dawson's wrists as she stood trembling in the dusty town square of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory, 1875. The noon sun beat down mercilessly on her exposed head, her honey-brown hair falling in tangled waves around her tear-streaked face. The townsfolk gathered in a wide circle, their expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. "Thief," Sheriff Higgins bellowed, pacing around her like a predator. "This woman has been caught stealing from Thornton's general store. Judge Williams has sentenced her to 3 days of public shaming before being transported to Helena for formal trial." Bonnie's throat was parched, her lips cracked from thirst and the bitter taste of fear. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd been framed by Thornton himself after rejecting his unwanted advances. But who would believe her? A 22-year-old orphan who'd arrived in town just 3 weeks ago, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a teaching certificate that had earned her the position at the town's small schoolhouse. The crowd murmured and shifted. Some women pulled their children closer, as if her alleged crime might be contagious. The heavy iron chains securing her to the wooden post rattled as she swayed slightly, fighting to remain conscious in the oppressive heat. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Please." Sheriff Higgins sneered. "Criminals don't deserve comfort." A cloud of dust rose at the edge of town, heralding the arrival of a lone rider. The crowd parted as a tall man on a chestnut stallion approached. Bonnie squinted through the haze, struggling to make out his features. The newcomer dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. He moved with a quiet confidence that commanded attention, his face partially obscured by the brim of a weathered brown hat. His appearance was rugged, a thick beard covering his jaw and clothes dusty from the trail. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the wooden handle of his revolver worn smooth from use. The stranger assessed the scene with piercing blue eyes, his gaze eventually settling on Bonnie. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, but Bonnie was certain she'd never seen him before. "What's going on here?" His voice was deep, carrying across the square with authority. Sheriff Higgins puffed out his chest. "Justice being served. This woman's a thief." "None of your concern, stranger." The man approached Bonnie slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. When he was close enough that only she could hear, he whispered, "Play along if you want to live." Before Bonnie could process his words, the stranger turned to face the crowd, drawing his knife in one swift motion. The blade glinted in the sunlight as he moved toward her chains. "Stop right there." Sheriff Higgins drew his pistol. "That woman is in lawful custody." The stranger didn't hesitate. With several powerful strikes, he severed the chains binding Bonnie to the post. The links clattered to the ground as gasps rippled through the crowd. "She's my wife," the stranger declared, his voice carrying across the now silent square, "and I'm taking her home." Bonnie stared at him in shock. His wife. She'd never seen this man before in her life. Yet something in his eyes, a silent plea, perhaps kept her from protesting. Sheriff Higgins advanced, his pistol still trained on the stranger. "Your wife. That's mighty convenient, mister, and who might you be?" "Blake Forrester." He wrapped a protective arm around Bonnie's shoulders. "I've been tracking her for 2 weeks since she ran off from our homestead near Fort Benton. Whatever she's done, I'll make it right." Thornton pushed his way through the crowd, his face red with anger. "This is nonsense." "I caught her stealing red-handed," Blake's expression hardened. "And I'm willing to pay for any damages or losses. Name your price." Thornton sputtered, clearly caught off guard by the offer. Sheriff Higgins looked uncertain, his pistol lowering slightly. $20 should cover it, Thornton finally said, naming an exorbitant sum. Without hesitation, Blake reached into his pocket and produced the money. "Consider it settled." Sheriff Higgins holstered his weapon reluctantly. "I don't like this, Forrester. But if you're willing to take responsibility for her—" "I am." Blake's tone left no room for argument. He turned to Bonnie, his expression softening just enough for her to see that, beneath his stern exterior, was something else, something that looked suspiciously like kindness. Let's go home, wife. Bonnie's legs trembled as she took a step forward, the remaining chains on her wrists clinking. Blake guided her toward his horse, lifting her effortlessly onto the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. As they rode out of town, Bonnie remained silent, too stunned and exhausted to speak. It wasn't until Redemption Creek had faded into the distance that she found her voice. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. Blake kept his eyes on the trail ahead, because no one else would. The answer was simple, yet it revealed nothing about this mysterious man who had claimed her as his wife. As they rode deeper into the Montana wilderness, Bonnie realized she had exchanged one uncertain fate for another, placing her trust in a stranger whose intentions remained as obscure as the path ahead. They rode for hours, following a winding trail through rolling hills covered with sagebrush and tall grass. The sun began its slow descent, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Bonnie's body ached, her wrists raw from the iron manacles that still dangled from them. "We'll stop soon," Blake said, noticing her discomfort. "There's a creek just beyond that ridge where we can make camp." True to his word, they soon arrived at a small creek nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees. Blake dismounted first, then gently helped Bonnie down. Her legs buckled beneath her, weak from standing so long in the town square and the hours of riding. Blake caught her before she fell. "Easy now." His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so weathered. Bonnie steadied herself, acutely aware of how close they stood. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, not from age, as he couldn't be much past 30, but from squinting against the sun and wind. "Thank you," she managed, stepping back. Blake nodded, then busied himself unsaddling his horse. "Sit, rest, I'll see about those chains." Bonnie sank gratefully onto a fallen log, watching as Blake efficiently set up camp with the practiced movements of a man accustomed to life on the trail. He built a small fire, arranged his bedroll, and secured his horse before approaching her with his canteen. "Drink," he offered. Bonnie accepted it eagerly, the cool water soothing her parched throat. She drank deeply, some of it spilling down her chin in her haste. Slowly, Blake cautioned, a hint of amusement in his voice. "There's plenty more." When she'd had her fill, Blake knelt before her and examined the manacles on her wrists. "These will need some work. Hold still." From his saddlebag, he retrieved a small leather pouch containing various tools. With careful precision, he worked at the locks, his brow furrowed in concentration. "How did you learn to do this?" Bonnie asked, wincing as the metal scraped against her raw skin. Blake's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Let's just say I've had experience with the wrong side of the law." "You're an outlaw," alarm crept into her voice. He corrected. "Army now, scout for the 7th Cavalry at Fort Ellis." The first manacle clicked open, and Bonnie sighed with relief as it fell away. Blake gently turned her wrist, examining the angry red marks beneath. "These need tending." He worked in silence on the second manacle, freeing her other wrist before retrieving a small tin of salve from his pack. "This might sting," he warned, applying the medicine to her wounds with surprising tenderness. As he worked, Bonnie studied his face. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in his touch and a sadness in his eyes that intrigued her. "Why did you tell them I was your wife?" she asked softly. Blake's hands paused momentarily. "It was the quickest way to get you out of there." Few men would interfere with another man's claim to his wife, even a sheriff. "But why help me at all? You don't know me." Blake finished bandaging her wrists and sat back on his heels. "I know injustice when I see it." He stood, returning his medical supplies to his pack. "Are you hungry?" The abrupt change of subject was clear he didn't want to elaborate. Bonnie nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since the previous day. Blake prepared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. As they ate, the sky darkened to deep indigo, stars appearing one by one above them. "Tomorrow I'll take you to Fort Ellis," Blake said, staring into the fire. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next. I can't go back to Redemption Creek, Bonnie said, her voice small. I have nothing left there anyway. What brought you to that God-forsaken place? Bonnie sighed, setting aside her tin plate. I came west to teach. My parents died last year in Boston influenza. I had no family, no prospects. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, it seemed like a chance for a fresh start. And instead you found trouble. Thornton, Bonnie said, her voice hardening. He offered me lodging above his store until the schoolhouse was ready. At first he was kind, but then... She trailed off, the memory making her skin crawl. I understand, Blake said quietly. Men like that are everywhere. They fell into silence, the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of the night surrounding them. Bonnie fought to keep her eyes open, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Sleep, Blake said, noticing her struggle. You're safe now. Bonnie hesitated, glancing at the single bedroll. Blake followed her gaze. Take it, I'll keep watch. But you need rest too. I'm used to sleeping under the stars. His tone was final. Too tired to argue, Bonnie retreated to the bedroll, wrapping herself in its warmth. As she drifted toward sleep, she watched Blake through half-closed eyes. He sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, his profile illuminated by the flickering firelight. Thank you, she murmured. Blake turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Sleep well, Bonnie. It was only as sleep claimed her that she realized she had never told him her name. Morning arrived with a gentle mist rising from the creek. Bonnie woke to find Blake already up, tending to a small fire where coffee brewed in a battered pot. He acknowledged her with a nod, handing her a steaming cup without a word. Bonnie accepted it gratefully, wrapping her bandaged hands around the warmth. How did you know my name? She asked, picking up the thread of last night's puzzle. Blake paused in his preparations, his back to her. I heard the sheriff say it. It was a plausible explanation, yet something in his tone made Bonnie wonder if there was more to it. Before she could press further, Blake changed the subject. We should reach Fort Ellis by nightfall if we make good time. He handed her a piece of jerky and some hardtack. Eat, we'll leave soon. As they broke camp, Bonnie noticed Blake's efficient movements, the way he packed everything with military precision. There was something comforting about his competence, about knowing she was with someone who understood this wild country. They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the landscape gradually changing as they moved eastward. The hills became more pronounced, and in the distance, snow-capped mountains rose against the blue sky. The Gallatin Range, Blake explained, following her gaze. Beautiful, aren't they? Bonnie nodded, captivated by the majesty of the mountains. I've never seen anything like them. In Boston, everything is so contained, and here everything is vast, Blake said, a note of pride in his voice. It can be overwhelming at first, but there's freedom in it. Is that why you came west, for freedom? Blake was silent for a long moment. Something like that. The war changed everything for me. Couldn't go back to Virginia afterward, too many ghosts. You fought for the Confederacy. Bonnie couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. I fought for Virginia, Blake corrected, but that's ancient history now. Out here, a man is judged by what he does, not what side he was on. Bonnie considered this. And what will they judge me for at Fort Ellis? Being an accused thief, you'll be under my protection, Blake assured her. Colonel Brackett is a fair man, he'll listen to your story. As the day progressed, Bonnie found herself relaxing in Blake's company. Despite his initially intimidating appearance, there was something inherently trustworthy about him. He pointed out landmarks as they rode, sharing snippets of knowledge about the land and its wildlife. He told her about his work as a scout, mapping unexplored territories and serving as an intermediary with local tribes. The army sees the Indians as enemies, he explained, but most just want to live in peace. It's a complicated situation. You sound sympathetic to them, Bonnie observed. Blake shrugged. I respect anyone fighting to protect their home and way of life. Wouldn't you? The question hung between them, reminding Bonnie of all she had lost. I suppose I would, she said softly. If I had a home worth fighting for. Blake glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Everyone deserves that. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat a small meal. Bonnie found herself watching Blake covertly, noting the way the sun highlighted the auburn tones in his beard, how his eyes crinkled slightly when he pointed out a hawk circling overhead. There was something both stern and gentle about him, a contradiction that fascinated her. As they prepared to continue their journey, Blake approached her with a spare shirt from his pack. "The sun's getting stronger. You should cover your arms." Bonnie accepted the offering, touched by his thoughtfulness. The shirt was far too large, but she rolled up the sleeves and tied the front into a knot at her waist. The fabric carried his scent: leather, pine, and something uniquely male. "Thank you," she said, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. Blake cleared his throat, turning away to check the horse's saddle. "We should move on. There's a section of rough country ahead." As they rode, the terrain became more challenging, with steep ravines and rocky outcroppings. Blake kept them moving at a steady pace, occasionally reaching around Bonnie to guide the horse through particularly difficult passages. Each time his arm brushed against her, Bonnie felt a strange flutter in her stomach. It was late afternoon when they crested a rise and Blake suddenly reined in the horse, his body tensing. "What is it?" Bonnie asked, alarmed by his change in demeanor. Blake's eyes scanned the horizon. "Riders, 4 of them, coming fast from the north." Bonnie followed his gaze, spotting the distant figures. "Is it the sheriff? Has he followed us?" "No," Blake said grimly. "Those aren't lawmen." He urged the horse off the trail and into a stand of pines. "We need to hide." They dismounted quickly, Blake leading the horse deeper into the trees. He tied the animal to a low branch, then drew his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "If there's trouble, do exactly as I say." Bonnie nodded, her heart pounding. They crouched behind a fallen log, watching as the riders approached the trail they had just left. From this distance, Bonnie could see that the men were rough-looking, their horses lathered from hard riding. "Road agents," Blake whispered. "Highwaymen. They prey on travelers in these parts." One of the men dismounted, examining the ground. He called to his companions, pointing in the direction Blake and Bonnie had taken. "They've seen our tracks," Blake muttered. "Get ready to run if I tell you to." The men conferred briefly, then spread out, clearly intending to search the area. Blake's finger hovered near the trigger of his rifle. "If shooting starts, head east through those trees," he instructed. "There's a ravine about 200 yards that way. Hide there and wait for me." Bonnie gripped his arm. "I won't leave you." Blake met her eyes, surprise flickering across his face at her determination. Before he could respond, a shout went up from one of the men. They had been spotted. "There they are." Blake rose to his full height, rifle aimed. "That's far enough," he called. "We've got nothing worth dying for." The leader of the group, a burly man with a scarred face, laughed. "We'll be the judge of that, and I reckon that pretty little thing with you might be worth quite a bit." Bonnie felt sick at the implication. Blake's expression hardened, his body shifting slightly to position himself more fully in front of her. "Last warning," Blake said, his voice deadly calm. "Ride on." The tension stretched between them, seconds feeling like hours. Then the leader made a subtle movement toward his pistol. Blake fired first, the shot echoing through the trees. The leader fell from his horse with a cry, clutching his shoulder. The other men drew their weapons, bullets splintering the bark of nearby trees. "Run," Blake shouted, returning fire. Bonnie hesitated only a moment before dashing eastward as instructed. Behind her, she could hear more shots, the shouts of men, the terrified whinnies of horses. She ran blindly, branches whipping at her face, her breath coming in gasps. When she reached the ravine Blake had mentioned, she scrambled down its rocky side, finding shelter beneath an overhanging ledge. Her heart hammered in her chest as she strained to listen for sounds of pursuit. The gunfire had stopped. Was Blake hurt, captured, or worse? The thought sent a wave of panic through her. This man she barely knew had risked his life for her twice now, and somehow, in the span of a day, he had become vitally important to her. Minutes stretched on with no sign of him. Bonnie began to fear the worst. She was debating whether to venture back when she heard movement above her. Pressing herself against the ravine wall, she held her breath. "Bonnie," Blake's voice, though quiet, sent a flood of relief through her. "Here," she called back. Blake appeared at the edge of the ravine, his face grim but unharmed. He made his way down to her, leading his horse. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. Bonnie nodded. "What happened to those men? They won't be bothering us again," Blake said simply. "But we need to move quickly. There could be more of them nearby." He helped her onto the horse before mounting behind her. This time, his arm wrapped more securely around her waist, holding her firmly against him as they rode. Bonnie found herself leaning into his strength, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They rode hard for another hour, putting distance between themselves and the scene of the confrontation. As the sun began to set, Fort Ellis came into view in the valley below them, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade, the American flag visible even from this distance. "We made it," Bonnie breathed. Blake's arm tightened briefly around her. "I told you I'd keep you safe." As they approached the fort's gates, Bonnie was struck by a sudden realization. Once inside, their journey together would end. Blake would return to his duties, and she would be left to forge a new path for herself. The thought left her with an unexpected sense of loss. The sentry called out a challenge as they neared the gate. Scout Forrester returning with a civilian, Blake responded. The gates swung open, allowing them entry into the bustling fort. Soldiers moved about on various errands, smoke rose from cookfires, and horses nickered in corrals. After the solitude of their journey, the activity was almost overwhelming. Blake dismounted first, then reached up to help Bonnie down. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication. "Forrester," a voice broke the moment. A tall officer approached, his uniform marking him as a senior rank. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Blake straightened, snapping to attention. "Colonel Brackett, sir, had a change of plans." The colonel's eyes shifted to Bonnie, curiosity evident in his expression. "And who might this be?" Blake hesitated, and Bonnie realized he was unsure how to introduce her. Was she still his wife in this new context? "Bonnie Dawson, sir," she said, stepping forward. "Mr. Forrester rescued me from a difficult situation in Redemption Creek." Colonel Brackett raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" "That sounds like a story worth hearing." He turned to Blake. "Report to my office once you've seen to your horse and the lady's comfort." As the colonel walked away, Blake led Bonnie toward the quartermaster's building. "You'll be given quarters for the night," he explained. "The colonel's wife, Martha, will help you get settled. She's a good woman." Bonnie nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. "And what happens tomorrow?" Blake's expression was unreadable. "That depends on what you want." "What I want?" The question caught her off guard. "If you wish to continue on to another town, arrangements can be made for safe transport. Or," he hesitated, "you could stay here. The fort school needs a teacher." Hope flickered in Bonnie's chest. "There's a school here," Blake nodded. "For the officers' children and some from the nearby settlement. The previous teacher left last month to get married." The possibility of starting fresh, of pursuing her intended profession after all, was tempting. But there was something else keeping her from immediately accepting the man standing before her, whose presence had somehow become vital to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "I'll consider it," she said softly. Blake's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Good. I'll find you after I've spoken with the colonel." As promised, Martha Brackett proved to be a kind and efficient hostess. She provided Bonnie with a small but comfortable room in the officers' quarters, fresh clothes, and a hot bath that seemed like the height of luxury after the day's ordeal. "Mr. Forrester seems quite concerned for your welfare," Martha observed as she helped Bonnie dress in a borrowed gown. "I've never seen him take such an interest in anyone before." Bonnie felt her cheeks warm. "He saved my life. I'm sure he'd do the same for anyone in trouble." Martha smiled knowingly. Perhaps, but he doesn't look at everyone the way he looks at you. Before Bonnie could respond to this startling observation, a knock sounded at the door. Martha opened it to reveal Blake, now clean-shaven and dressed in a fresh uniform that transformed his appearance. Without his beard, he looked younger, his strong jawline and the cleft in his chin now visible. His blue eyes seemed even more striking against his sun-darkened skin. "Mrs. Brackett," he said, nodding politely. "The Colonel asked me to escort Miss Dawson to dinner." Martha smiled. "Of course." "She's ready." She gave Bonnie's hand a gentle squeeze before departing, leaving them alone. Blake's eyes traveled over Bonnie, taking in her transformation. The borrowed dress was simple but flattering, its blue fabric complementing her honey-brown hair, which Martha had helped her arrange in a neat bun. "You look." Blake cleared his throat. "That is, you seem recovered from our journey." Bonnie smiled at his obvious discomfort. This man who had faced down armed bandits without flinching was flustered by her appearance in a proper dress. "I feel much better, thank you," she said. "Though I wouldn't have survived to enjoy this comfort without your help." Blake offered his arm. "Shall we? The Colonel is waiting." Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Colonel Brackett and his wife made Bonnie feel welcome, asking about her background and education without prying into the uncomfortable details of her time in Redemption Creek. Blake, seated across from her, spoke little but watched her with an intensity that made her heart flutter whenever their eyes met. After the meal, Colonel Brackett invited them to his study. "I've discussed your situation with my wife," he said to Bonnie once they were seated. "We agree that the position of teacher would suit you admirably, should you wish to accept it." Bonnie glanced at Blake, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I would be honored, Colonel," she said. "Teaching is my passion." "Excellent." The Colonel seemed genuinely pleased. "The school has been without instruction for too long. You can begin next week after you've had time to settle in." "There is one other matter, sir," Blake interjected, his voice unusually hesitant. "Regarding Miss Dawson's status." Colonel Brackett raised an eyebrow. "Yes." Blake straightened in his chair. "To extract her from danger in Redemption Creek, I claimed she was my wife." The Colonel's eyes widened slightly. "I see, and this claim was a necessary deception at the time," Blake confirmed. "However, it may complicate matters if word reaches the fort." Bonnie felt her cheeks burning. She hadn't considered the potential scandal of their travel arrangement, or how it might affect her position as teacher. "Indeed," the Colonel mused, "propriety must be maintained, especially for someone in Miss Dawson's position." He studied them both for a moment. "There is, of course, a simple solution." Blake shifted in his seat. "Sir, make the claim true," Colonel Brackett said bluntly. "Chaplain Wilson could perform the ceremony tomorrow." Bonnie gasped, too shocked to speak. Marriage to a man she'd known for barely 2 days. Blake's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's a serious proposition, sir." "These are serious circumstances, Forrester." The Colonel leaned forward. "Miss Dawson needs protection from the legal troubles in Redemption Creek. You've already demonstrated your willingness to provide that protection. Marriage would legitimize your actions and secure her position here." The room fell silent. Bonnie stared at her hands, her mind racing. It was true that marriage would solve many practical problems. It would explain her sudden appearance at the fort, provide her with a respected position as a scout's wife, and likely prevent any further pursuit from Redemption Creek. But marriage was meant to be more than a practical arrangement. She risked a glance at Blake, surprised to find him already looking at her, his expression softer than she'd yet seen it. "Perhaps," the Colonel said, rising from his chair, "you two should discuss this privately. Martha and I will take a turn around the grounds." When they were alone, the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Blake moved to sit beside her. "Bonnie," he began, his voice gentle, "I want you to know that you're under no obligation. If you choose to decline, I'll still ensure your safety here." Bonnie met his gaze. "You would marry a stranger to protect her reputation." "You're not a stranger," Blake said quietly. "Not anymore. Something in his tone made Bonnie's heart quicken. "What am I, then?" Blake reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Someone I couldn't bear to see in chains, someone whose courage these past 2 days has impressed me more than you know." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Someone I'd like to know better, if you'll allow it." Bonnie studied his face, seeing in it now what she had only glimpsed before: warmth, honesty, and something that might, with time, grow into love. "It's not how I imagined marriage would come to me," she admitted. "But then, nothing about my life has gone as imagined lately." Blake's lips curved into a small smile. "Life rarely follows our plans out here. Sometimes we must adapt to survive." His expression grew more serious. "But I promise you this, if you accept, I will be a true husband to you in every way that matters. I will protect you, provide for you, and treat you with the respect you deserve." "And what of affection?" Bonnie asked boldly, surprising herself. "What of love?" Blake's hand tightened around hers. "I believe those can grow between two people of good character who share respect and common purpose." He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "I already admire you greatly, Bonnie Dawson. I suspect that admiration could easily deepen into more." Bonnie felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. There was truth in them. She had felt the connection between them from the moment he had cut her chains, a connection that had only strengthened during their journey. "Yes," she said softly. Blake blinked, as if not quite believing what he'd heard. "Yes," Bonnie smiled, feeling suddenly lighter than she had in months. "Yes, Blake Forrester, I will marry you." The transformation in his expression was remarkable, the stern, controlled scout giving way to a man whose joy couldn't be contained. His smile lit his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing a dimple in his right cheek that Bonnie hadn't noticed before. "You've made me a very fortunate man," he said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture sent a pleasant shiver up Bonnie's arm. In that moment, she knew she had made the right decision. The Bracketts returned to find them sitting close together, hands still joined, an air of quiet contentment between them. "I take it congratulations are in order?" the colonel asked, a knowing smile on his face. Blake stood, pulling Bonnie gently to her feet beside him. "They are, sir." "Miss Dawson has agreed to become my wife." Martha Brackett clapped her hands in delight. "Wonderful. We'll arrange everything for tomorrow afternoon. The entire fort will want to celebrate." As the Bracketts enthusiastically began planning, Blake leaned down to whisper in Bonnie's ear. "Are you certain? There's still time to change your mind." Bonnie turned to face him, finding courage in the warmth of his gaze. "I'm certain. You cut my chains, Blake Forrester. I believe you've been freeing me ever since." The next day passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word spread quickly through the fort, and the community rallied to make the occasion special. The officers' wives contributed items for a proper wedding dress, altering a gown of cream-colored silk to fit Bonnie's slender frame. Flowers were gathered from the surrounding countryside, and the mess hall was transformed with bunting and ribbons for the celebration afterward. Throughout the day, Bonnie caught glimpses of Blake as he moved about the fort, accepting congratulations from his fellow soldiers with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Each time their eyes met across the busy yard, he would smile in a way that made her heart flutter. By late afternoon, Bonnie stood in her borrowed finery, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, waiting for Martha Brackett to escort her to the chapel. Nervous anticipation fluttered in her stomach. "You make a beautiful bride," Martha said, adjusting the simple veil. "And Blake is a good man. Quiet, dependable, and braver than most. You've chosen well." "He chose me," Bonnie reminded her, still amazed by the turn of events. Martha smiled knowingly. "Perhaps, but I suspect you both found exactly what you needed." The small chapel was filled to capacity when Bonnie entered on Colonel Brackett's arm. Soldiers and their families stood as she passed, but Bonnie saw only Blake, waiting for her at the altar. He wore his dress uniform, his posture military straight, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and Bonnie was surprised to feel them trembling slightly. This man, who had faced danger without flinching, was nervous to marry her. The realization endeared him to her even more. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Chaplain Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Blake leaned down to place a gentle kiss on Bonnie's lips there first. It was tentative, respectful, but held a promise of deeper passion to come. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and more food than Bonnie had seen in months. Blake remained by her side throughout, his hand often finding the small of her back or clasping hers, as if reassuring himself that she was real. As the evening wore on, Bonnie found herself growing increasingly aware of what was to come. She and Blake would share quarters tonight, share a bed. The thought sent a flutter of nervous anticipation through her. When they finally took their leave, amid good-natured teasing from the soldiers, Blake led her to a small cabin set slightly apart from the main buildings. "It's not much," he said apologetically as they approached, "but it's private, the quarters for married scouts." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a curtained-off sleeping area. Someone had been there before them. A fire burned low in the grate, and fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the table. "Home," Blake said softly, closing the door behind them. The word hung in the air between them, full of meaning. Home, something neither of them had truly had in a long time. Bonnie moved to the fireplace, warming her hands. "It's lovely." Blake remained by the door, watching her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Bonnie," he said, his voice low, "I meant what I said yesterday. I won't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give." She turned to face him, understanding his meaning. "We are married, Blake." "In name, yes, but I want more than that." He took a step toward her. "I want you to come to me willingly, not out of obligation." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. This man who had claimed her so boldly in Redemption Creek now stood before her, patient and respectful, giving her the choice he hadn't been able to offer then. Bonnie closed the distance between them, reaching up to touch his freshly shaven cheek. "I am here willingly, Blake Forrester." In every way. Something flared in his eyes, relief, desire, and a deeper emotion that made Bonnie's breath catch. He pulled her gently into his arms, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips found hers. This kiss was different from their first, deeper, more certain. Bonnie melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she responded with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally parted, both breathless, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he whispered. "When I rode into Redemption Creek, I was just following rumors of trouble. I had no idea my life was about to change." Bonnie smiled up at him. "When I saw you riding toward me, I thought you were a mirage. I couldn't believe someone had actually come to help me." "I'll always come for you," Blake promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Wherever you are, whatever you need, I'll be there." As he lowered his mouth to hers once more, Bonnie knew that what had begun as an act of rescue had transformed into something far more precious. The chains that had bound her in that dusty town square were truly broken now, replaced by bonds of a different sort, bonds of choice, of respect, and of a love that had sparked in the most unlikely circumstances, and now promised to burn bright for years to come. 5 years later, Bonnie stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Blake taught their 3-year-old son Benjamin to ride his pony in the fenced yard. Their 1-year-old daughter Bailey slept peacefully in the cradle beside her, her tiny features so like her father's it made Bonnie smile. The land around them was theirs now, a homestead claimed 20 miles from Fort Ellis, with good water, rich soil, and enough grazing land for their growing herd of cattle. Blake had left the Army 2 years ago, using his knowledge of the territory to build something permanent for his family. "Not too fast, Ben," Blake called as the boy urged his pony into a trot. His laughter carried across the yard, a sound that had become increasingly common as the years passed. Bonnie's heart swelled with contentment. From those desperate moments chained in a town square to this a home, a family, a love that had deepened with each passing day. Blake had kept every promise he'd made on their wedding night, and more besides. When he caught sight of her watching, Blake's face lit with the smile he reserved only for her. He lifted Benjamin from the pony and set him on his shoulders, striding toward the porch. "Mama," Ben called excitedly. "Did you see me ride?" "I did, sweetheart," Bonnie confirmed, ruffling his dark hair so like his father's as Blake set him down. "You're becoming quite the cowboy." Blake wrapped an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like father, like son," he murmured, pride evident in his voice. As the sun set over their land, painting the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Bonnie leaned into her husband's embrace. The chains of her past had long since fallen away, replaced by the bonds of love, bonds that had proved stronger than iron, more precious than gold, and more enduring than she could have ever imagined when a dust-covered stranger rode into Redemption Creek and declared, "She's my wife."